My name is Adrian Navarre, the CEO and founder of Ticker Trends. Recently, there was an article posted by The Terminalist called Bloomberg's Last Stand, The Great Unbundling and Why MCP Will Redistribute Value. This is obviously exceedingly relevant to my business and industry. And I thought this article brings up a lot of great points that are very hot topics in the industry, and that I also see internally running a financial alternative data business. I want to talk about some of the key points that this article goes over, and also some of my opinions on those key points and what I'm doing as a data business owner to be proactive or to structure the strategy of my business around accounting for things that are mentioned in this essay. If you're interested in reading the full note, which I highly recommend even after watching this video, I'll leave a link in the description below to read the full Bloomberg Last Stand article. The core argument of this essay overall is that the MCP will do to financial data platforms what the internet did to telecom companies. So Bloomberg and other incumbents historically have captured the most value because they controlled not just the data, but also the interface, integrations, workflows, and customer relationship. And so that's allowed these businesses to succeed significantly. But the MCP or the advent of AI and language models potentially separates those things. So instead of a user opening Bloomberg, FactSet, or any other individual platform, an analyst could work alongside an AI interface that calls several different data providers in the background, compares their outputs, and combines them into a conclusion. So the article argues overall that the most valuable layer will shift from the company that owns the data, which is kind of how the world is now, which companies have the data, which companies can manage the relationship to the largest number of clients and have large sales teams. It will shift from the company that owns the data to the company that controls the orchestration of the data. So the interface closest to the user will capture the most value. So even when the underlying data providers remain necessary, they risk becoming invisible backend suppliers, essentially. So MCP lowers the cost of connecting models to different data sets and tools, and that makes it much easier for an AI agent to look across several different financial data providers at once, compare competing sources, select the best source for each question, and combine external data with a firm's internal information and turn those inputs into an actual investment conclusion. So this is much more important than simply summarizing a research report. The biggest unlock here would be cross-source reasoning. So using multiple data sets or looking across data providers and determining what is the best one, or combining multiple insights from those different data providers to find the most accurate output or conclusion for the question or investment topic that's being researched. So the model could combine things like earnings transcripts, alternative data, expert interviews, estimates, and internal research into a conclusion that no individual provider could produce alone. So the article argues that the risk for incumbents is that standardized access reduces traditional switching costs. So historically, changing data vendors requires new integrations, and there's a lot of overhead for different large investment firms to change data vendors, such as training and different internal approvals, and maybe even infrastructure investment to have engineers integrate that data into the internal systems. With MCPs and language models, an agent may be able to substitute one provider for another at the query level. So depending on the specific question being asked, the agent would decide to query one data set over another, and could essentially swap out data sets on the fly. So that pushes vendors to compete more directly on accuracy, kind of freshness of data, coverage, reliability, and price. So it turns the data vendor business more into a commodity, essentially. It gives the orchestration platform, so the platform that's determining what data vendor to use, an incentive to commoditize the underlying vendors that it's choosing from. The better that the platform becomes at comparing and routing between sources, the less important any individual provider becomes to the end consumer of that data. So this is why overall Bloomberg has been very reluctant to expose its data through external MCPs, for example, is because Bloomberg wants this orchestration experience to stay inside of their platform. They realize the risk of if they become this commoditized portion of the supply chain, which is kind of what this graphic displays that I'm showing right now, where in distribution 1.0, which would be the current way that data is distributed, data and information become fully integrated in a terminal, and insight and decision are more modular and farther down the stack, and less value currently is produced at the insight and decision point in terms of data providers. They typically just provide the raw information, and then the firm or the individual has to come up with the insight and decision. Now, the curation and development of this data and information is becoming more modular, meaning an AI or a language model can query any data set and even research on the fly and discover what data set to use to answer a specific question. And that layer has now become very easy and comparable. And the real value add is at the insight and decision layer, the orchestration layer of determining what data sets to use and how to interpret and come to a valuable conclusion from those data sets, given that now there is so much information to potentially query, for example. And of course, there still is value at the data and information layer, which I'll go into in just a second. But this is essentially the premise of shifting the value chain from distribution 1.0 to distribution 2.0 that's mentioned in the article by the Terminalist. So under distribution 1.0, every data company needs its own interface, sales team, integrations, and customer relationships. And this heavily favors very large data businesses and large platforms. Under distribution 2.0, the AI orchestration layer handles distribution, and a smaller provider no longer needs to become another Bloomberg. It just needs to become the best source for a specific question. So that would benefit highly specialized data companies because agents can discover when they're relevant for a specific question. So in the world right now, the best data provider might be one that has the most resources, can provide the best transaction data to a client. They have all of those customer relationships. They have the interface, the sales teams, the integrations and customer relationships. And it's very incrementally hard for an end client to integrate some very obscure, maybe single use or rarely utilized or rarely valuable data set that would require them to go through that whole curation process to integrate that data into their workflows. Now in distribution 2.0, even if there is a question that requires some hyper obscure data set that previously would never be considered because it would have to go through this massive onboarding process to start working with the firm, now that data set can just be quickly queried. The vendor can be paid through an agent or language model that handles the entire process of sourcing that information. And then really the value now is primarily centered around the insight and decision based on that data that the agent is receiving. So that's essentially the premise of the article by the Terminalist. And I think it's very interesting. I think I've seen this in my own data business, which is that ticker trends largely does not compete whatsoever in the data and information stack of the financial data business. If anything, my business has always been structured from the very beginning to never charge clients based on an incremental data set or an incremental input that we're using into our system, right? The value that Ticker Trends produces for clients is not that we have a certain social data set. Like, it's not like, oh, people are paying us because Ticker Trends has TikTok data. Ultimately, we view TikTok data or any type of financial alternative data as being commoditized. It's very possible that anyone, given the right amount of resources, can access that type of data. And that's not what differentiates us. What differentiates Ticker Trends is being able to take all of these different data sets and form unique insights and decisions from those data sets. So the reason our clients pay us at Ticker Trends is because they know that we've created the proper orchestration layer to be able to determine from these alternative data sets what's the valuable information to answer this question, and how do you answer this question and interpret this question and apply it to markets. And in our case, we specialize in pre-purchase intent data. So taking all of this unstructured pre-purchase intent data and telling you what's relevant and how will it impact financial markets. So that's what our clients pay us for. But what we've seen is that there are many data businesses which are more so structured towards the distribution 1.0, which is, hey, we sell some raw time series data and you need to figure out how to connect it to markets or how to make it valuable, how to form the insight, how to form the decision. We're just going to tell you, for example, we're just going to tell you that transactions are rising for Kava restaurants. Now, you need to take that and put it into your insight and decision system, find out a way to understand when it's relevant, when it's not, what's an interesting insight, what's not an interesting insight. We're just going to sell you that Kava transactions are rising. And now what's happened is we've even seen this at Ticker Trends, which is providers of that nature are now integrating into these like data exchanges or modular MCPs or pay per request systems, where now that information is heavily competed on. So essentially the premise of the terminalist is what we've seen in our business as well, where like the incremental transaction data provider, the incremental geolocation data provider, the incremental social media data provider, ultimately those data sets can be accessed through these pay-per-request APIs, and the prices are going down more and more. And also there are more and more providers that are essentially providing like very, very similar information. If I want to get web traffic, there are like 20 providers to get that. If I want to get transaction data, there are 20 providers to get that. If I want to get geolocation data, there are 20 providers to get that. And we've seen that they all compete against each other to bring prices down more and more over time, especially as it becomes easier and easier to integrate this type of data into new systems. And it's easier to negotiate against them, to compare them. And so we've seen prices come down in the data and information layer of the business. So I think in my view of this, there are definitely shifts in the industry away from this distribution 1.0 model to the distribution 2.0 model. And we will very much so lean into that to be essentially the expert orchestration layer for our part of the research stack, which is Ticker Trends is the answer to how do you interpret pre-purchase intent data. We have systems and technology and infrastructure that can answer that question better than any generalized language model. And that's what we've been researching and applying to markets for 2 years now. I think that other data businesses are going to face are going to increasingly start to face this bottleneck or realize that they have less pricing power, that their current business model is not working and scaling anymore. And they will have to figure out a way to restructure the business or kind of lose the industry to a new startup, a new business that will replace them, who's more focused on the insight and decision layer. Now, that being said, I think there are still elements where the data and information are not so commoditized. The primary case of that, and I think you especially see this in financial markets, is that not all data is created equal. So when I'm looking at web traffic, for instance, part of what makes web traffic is very much a derived output, right? It's a business like many of these web traffic providers are businesses that aggregate clickstream data and have some system to build their derived output, which they define to be web traffic. And so not all creations of web traffic are created equal. And I think that there is still points of differentiation in the data and information layer where a credit card transaction provider or web traffic provider can be significantly better than others. And a model or agent might determine that paying a premium to gain more valuable or to gain more accurate information still worthwhile. But that being said, I think there's still going to be value compression because that could still be compared against the agent purchasing 20 different raw clickstream providers and building its own web traffic layer on the fly. So I think there's still some level of value compression, but I don't think there is a complete removal or complete commoditization of all forms of alternative data, as there are still very much differentiating factors between providers or between data sets. But that being said, this current process of onboarding and integrations into a certain firm's infrastructure, that will continue to decline. And so switching costs and the ability for firms to switch providers will be vastly lower than what it is right now. It'll be vastly easier in that case. So the final takeaway from this article, the article is probably right that AI interfaces will weaken the distribution advantage of traditional financial data platforms. But that conclusion, the conclusion overall should not be that all data will become worthless. The value moves from data access towards proprietary interpretation. And I started to touch on that with the web traffic data set, right? Web traffic is to some extent an interpretation. If you truly have a better interpretation than everyone else, then you still can charge a premium for that. So generic connectors or raw data sets will get commoditized. So something like scraping standard financial documents and converting it into JSON. So something like that. Those data sets that are like publicly available information, transforming different data structures into machine readable formats that a lot of these larger financial data businesses do, that will continue to get commoditized and cheaper. And then specialized intelligence, building those systems that know how to interpret or orchestrate what data sets to use, how to interpret them, how to apply them to markets, that will continue to become more valuable and more specialized for those specific use cases. So the winners will either own the orchestration layer or provide expertise that the orchestration layer cannot cheaply reproduce on its own. Those will be the ultimate beneficiaries of this transition from distribution 1.0 to 2.0. As always, I think this is exceedingly debatable. If you have different opinions than me, based on your interpretation of the Terminalist article, your interpretation of what businesses will benefit, if the Terminalist is completely wrong, which is also a fair conclusion to come to. I'm very curious your view, and feel free to leave your opinion in the comments, and I'll have a great discussion with you. And I'd even be interested to get on a call and hear your opinion and talk it over and even debate things on the fly, just because I think this is such an important distinction for the data industry.